recording.
We're good.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Welcome everybody to the June 3rd, 2024 meeting of the Bicycle Advisory Committee and the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. Can you all hear us okay? Yeah. Okay. All right. So we're gonna do introductions just real briefly. We'll do the room first and then we'll do the camera. So my name is Cynthia Palmer and I'm the chair of the Bicycle Advisory Committee, and we can go this way.
All right. And I'm Eric Goodman, and I am the chair, well, the acting chair of the Pedestrian Committee, and I'm also on the Bicycle Advisory Committee as well.
I'm Leslie Tierstein. I'm just a civilian. I work with the Bicycle Advisory Committee and bicycle a lot. Okay.
I'm Allison Bullock. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager here at Arlington.
And my name is Brian Shelton. I'm the active transportation planner here in Arlington.
I'm David Patton. I'm a transportation planner, and I work with Brian and Allison.
Dana Bress on the Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Emma Van Hine, the PAC recording secretary.
Mike Hanna on the Bike Committee.
I'm Steve Offit. I'm on the Bicycle Advisory Committee. Hello, Gonzalez, transportation planner with Arlington County.
Collier Cook, step server.
Jeff Williams, 22202, resident and pedestrian.
And Mary.
John Armstrong, Pedestrian Advisory Committee.
And
Mary, you can introduce yourself. We're doing introductions.
Oh, okay. Mary's Wow with Bike and Walk Arlington. I live in Blue Mont.
Forgot to do you.
We're trying to keep it short.
All right.
Do people online quickly?
Okay, we'll start with Randy.
Randy Swart from Barcroft.
Thanks. Jim Feaster.
Jim Feaster, member of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee. I live in Ballston.
Martin Andrew.
Martin.
Or Andrew, I'm sorry, Andrew Martin. Sorry, I didn't see.
He's muted.
All right,
Oh, Dick's on good.
okay. Jay Corballis.
Hi, everybody. Jay Corballis with JBG Smith.
And Matt Jones.
Hey everyone, it's Matt Jones, Mobility Manager with the National Landing Bid.
And Nick.
Nick Giacobbe, civic activist from Aurora Highlands. I do a lot of biking and walking in this area and want to make sure that it stays as safe as it is right now, if not even safer. Thanks.
Patrick.
Good evening, Patrick Kenny, member of the PAC, and I live in Boston.
Carol Fuller.
Carol Fuller from Crystal City, and I'm the Crystal and Pentagon Cities Council. Okay, never remember what the new name is.
Let's see, who else? Dan
Reinhardt.
Hi, I'm Dan Reinhardt. I'm with VDOT.
Jeff.
And then go back to Andrew.
Hi, Jeff Giffen with Kimmy Horn. I'm the consultant project manager supporting VDOT.
Everyone? And did we miss anyone?
Go back to you, Andrew.
Hi, I'm Terry Yates with VDOT as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And Andrew Martin.
Sorry, yep, Andrew Martin, Arlington Heights, and the Bicycle Advisory Committee.
Thank you. Right, I think that's everyone. We move forward. Well, I guess before we go, is there anybody that has public comment? No public comment, then let's move on to our first agenda item, which is the Phase 2 draft report of the Group 1 multimodal improvement study. So, Mr. Reinhardt, why don't you take it away?
All right, thanks everybody. Looks like Jeff's pulling up the slides, which is great. I just real quickly, Terry Yates introduced himself as part of VDOT. Nick Roper, who's been in a lot of these meetings, has actually been promoted. Terry has taken Nick's place as the Northern Virginia project development engineer. So if Terry jumps in for some reason, you'll know who he is.
Dan, I was trying to stay under the radar. Thanks a lot.
That's fine. He's still getting his feet under him with regard to this project. There's a lot of history here. So, and I don't want to take too much time with that. So let's get moving. All right, so we're here to talk about the draft Phase 2 report. It is posted on the website, both an executive summary and the full Phase 2 report. There was a request. The original deadline, I think, was the 17th of June for comments. There was a request to extend that deadline, so the deadline is now June 28th, which is a Friday. Next slide. Actually, go back, Jeff. So one thing I do want to say, so we did get a bunch of comments from PAC, I think via Dana Bress and Pam Van Hine, so thank you for those. So a lot of those questions are what we're going to try to address tonight to the best of our ability. We have a limited amount of time, so we are not going to get to all of them. We are going to consider those comments. That doesn't mean you can't provide us more comments by the 28th, but we will address those as part of our summarizing the comments and providing responses that we'll do at the end of the comment period. And then if you could hold your comments till the end, we'll try and get through as much as we can, and then we'll have a comment period at the end of this session. Or a question and answer, I should say. All right, so one of the things that we want to make clear is kind of where we are in the process. There were quite a few comments or questions that were looking for very specific details. The one that jumps to mind was about what kind of trees we're going to plant. So I thought that this would be a good opportunity to talk about where we are. So right now we're doing a feasibility study. The goal of what we're achieving right now with Phase 1 and Phase 2 is, can we build? So it was first to evaluate the different options. We made a recommendation in the Phase 1 report to bring 15th and 18th Street down to grade and do improvements at 20th Street. We've expanded that to 23rd Street now in Phase 2. And Phase 2 is to further flush out some of those details, look at the TDM strategy to reduce traffic, expand on the multimodal analysis, do 10% design plans. But that's all still really in that feasibility window. So down at the bottom, you see a really rough sketch of what the process is going to look like going forward. So we're at the feasibility study. Once we get full funding for the project, then we'll move into the project development process, which starts with scoping. And then we will move through each of these steps as part of that project development process to get to construction. There will be another round of public meetings as part of that preliminary or project development process. So there will need to be a public hearing. So just because we wrap up Phase 2 here does not mean that this is the end of the opportunity for public input. Next slide, Jeff. So a couple quick updates, the speed study. So we have put together a speed study. We have submitted it to the district traffic engineer. It is currently under review. We are expecting comments from him, and there'll probably be some back and forth. But we are anticipating that this will get approved as we can move forward. So the speed study south of 23rd Street to the Arlington County line. Your request for that speed study was received. It was passed down to staff. They have talked to us. We are doing a preliminary analysis. So it is going to be considered a separate project. It would be a separate initiative, separate from the Phase 2, the Phase 1, Phase 2 study, the Route 1 multimodal project. That speed study would be considered a separate initiative. So Arlington County would be responsible for funding that effort. VDOT would certainly conduct it. So one of the interim steps that we're doing is our VDOT traffic engineering is actually looking at the data that's available. Do we think that this has a hope of success if we do a speed study? Because speed studies are fairly lengthy and can be fairly expensive. we were going to go through an initial kind of evaluation process. We'll pass that data along to Arlington County, and they'll make a determination in conjunction with us about whether we think that should move forward and whether it's worth investing that time and effort. So that's kind of where we are right now. Is VDOT Traffic Engineering is kind of doing a cursory review of that area. Next slide. All right, so now we'll try and get into some of the questions that you asked or the comments you passed along. So there were a bunch of comments actually that talked about enforcement. And I know enforcement's a big hot button issue. The way the project is looking at this is we have met with Arlington County Police Department as well as Virginia State Police. But the approach that the project needs to take on this is we are looking for ways that we can assist them with the construction of the project on doing enforcement in the future. So there were lots of questions of, are they going to do enforcement? Is enforcement going to be, you know, front and center? And what are the agreements? Unfortunately, the project can't create policy for either of those entities. We can't drive their enforcement. But one of the things we did do is we talked through, okay, if you go out and do enforcement, what are the criteria that you need? You know, where do you have to be stationed? Because there were specific criteria that they had where we have to be in a certain place on the side of the road. We have to be out of traffic, those sorts of things. So we have some ideas based on those conversations with, for example, what they call a perch, or an area they can sit and run radar. And so we are going to be incorporating some of that into the 10% design plans. We will go back to them and kind of work through that design with them. And hopefully we'll have that for you in the fall at our next public meeting. But so that's kind of the way we're looking at enforcement. Next slide. So travel demand management, there were some questions about the outreach that we've done with the regional transit providers. It was kind of a listening session for us in some respects. We did have some back and forth with them, with the different transit agencies. We confirmed existing service. We talked about them about planned and future service. Several of them told us about studies that they're doing about their service and, you know, different changes that they may be trying to make. Not that they had any detail for us, but that there is processes going on in the background. So they did help us with knowing some of those things, helped us with our TDM strategies as far as how do we shift people onto transit and different modes of transportation. And we talked through with them, you know, what are the existing needs in the bus stops that are under 18th Street. And that kind of fed our relocation of those onto Bell Street. So that's kind of where we went with the travel demand management discussions with the transit providers. Next slide. And as we get into some of the data here, I'm going to actually turn it over to Jeff Giffen with Kimley Horn to get into some of this data.
Great, thanks, Dan, and good evening, everyone. I mentioned before, I'm Jeff Giffen with Kimley Horn, and I do have a variety of other folks with me this evening. Some of the more technical folks that have been helping on the study. So if we have any more detailed questions later, they can help me answer those. But for the next kind of bucket of comments or questions, there was a variety of questions related to data types and uses. Specific questions about the tables that were in the report, and just wanted to highlight that on the screen here on the left is we collected a lot of different data from a variety of different sources, and some of them are interrelated and it can be correlated. Others cannot be as easily. So on the left, you know, we did collect field data, intersection turning movement counts, speed data, volumes. On the right, this is called streetlight data. That streetlight is a vendor name that uses what we call big data from a variety of sources, including mobile devices, to see how overall travel patterns are, origins and destinations. Those are the types of things that we used for developing the travel demand management program. So we mix and match those a little bit together. Not always apples to apples comparison, because the data from streetlight isn't every individual vehicle. It's a conglomeration of whoever has their devices turned on, and so it's a little bit of an estimation. So we don't take that as kind of the ground truth. That's just a pattern that we use to use our planning. So hopefully that answers some of those questions related to the data. Another question related to the data was on this figure 3-2 in the report, and there's a box here in gray that says poor data due to the weather and Omicron. And there was some questions about is the whole data set still good or not, or is that, what's going on there? And just wanted to kind of clarify that this little box really represents a very short window of time, a couple weeks to a month of time where that was probably the last big snowstorm this area has seen, where everything was pretty much shut down. With Omicron variant was kind of surging, there was a lot of changes with people working from home again. So that was kind of what we viewed as a blip on the radar. So we just kind of ignored that little short window of time. But the rest of the data is still very valid. It's still was very helpful as we were looking at patterns coming out of the pandemic and just looking at what what we call the new normal was going to be. So that's just really how we were assessing, and that clarifies what that note was on that figure. So the next series of questions and comments really were very location specific. We're going to go along the corridor, starting from the south. Starting at 23rd Street South in Route 1, there was a question whether VDOT will include a dedicated left turn signal on the eastbound movement. So if you look on the screen, this would be coming down on the screen to turn towards the right of the page. That would be eastbound to northbound. There currently is not a left turn arrow now. We were planning to not add that, mostly because that operations worked without it. And in doing so, if we did add a left turn phase or left turn arrow, that would likely increase the need to raise the cycle length for the whole traffic signal. And not only would we have to raise the cycle length for the signal, that means we would have to raise the cycle length for all of the signals along Route 1, because that is a coordinated system that really they all are tied together to make sure that they operate well together. So at this point, we don't anticipate having that left turn arrow, but as Dan mentioned earlier, this is a feasibility stage. Things could change in the future, but right now we're not planning on that. There was a question why we didn't include a no right turn on red for the eastbound right turn movement. So again, this is the same movement coming down on the page, turning to the left of the page, eastbound to southbound. There's not currently a no turn on red there now. That movement is very heavy from a vehicle standpoint, and we did test it with a no turn on red, and what we found was that the operations really deteriorated pretty poorly. The queue spilled back past Eade Street, and that's not really a viable option at the moment. But that's something that could be monitored in the future. That is a tool in the toolbox as we look at safety, and that could, even after the project's built, that could be monitored and potentially be implemented later if the future volumes don't pan out to be what they are. All right, moving to the next intersection to the north, 20th Street and Route 1. There was a question why there was a recommendation for the eastbound right turn lane to be stop controlled. And this is, you can see on my screen here, this movement here. The answer to that is we are coordinated very closely with a signal plan that was being developed as part of an adjacent development. That's what was included in that design, and that design had been vetted very closely between Arlington County and VDOT, the traffic engineering and development staff. So at this time, that's what we were planning to maintain. There was a question whether that could be signalized. That would be a very similar operation, and that could be considered again in the future into the detailed design. There was another question at this location of how the signals could be improved for safer bicycle pedestrian crossings of Route 1, and as they deal with conflicts, and whether LPIs would be included here. The answer to LPIs is yes, we will have LPIs. Again, there is an adjacent development that's going on. It is responsible for improvements here. So the intersection we've based our design very closely on is tightening up that intersection. It's bringing it more compact. There are other things that's being added, including a second crosswalk of Route 1. There currently is only one, so that does improve additional pedestrian circulation here. And also wide median refuges would also allow for two-stage crossing if folks think that that's more comfortable.
And Jeff, just to add on to that, in this case, that development on that southeast corner is also shifting Bell Street.
Yes,
Which
correct, Dan, which would help
should-
simplify conflicts and operations there. Thank you, Dan. Moving next to 18th Street and Route 1. This is the location where we have recommended a pedestrian scramble, or otherwise known as a barn stance. So there was a variety of questions related to that. The first was whether a diagonal crossing would preclude vehicle cyclists from taking the lane during the crossing. We don't preclude that. I mean, vehicles can always take the lane. They're legally allowed to. They're a vehicle. We're not pretty much planning on folks for doing that. I mean, we are providing the cycle track. That's the preference, but certainly people are welcome to do that. The design would not preclude that operation. We would anticipate the splits of the vehicle signals, which if the bikes were in the lanes, that's the signals that they would follow. They would be sufficient phasing and crossing time to complete that maneuver. So we don't anticipate that being an issue, and that would certainly be allowed if a cyclist chose to do that. Then there's also a variety of questions about the specific operation of the scramble related to the cycle length. Would that increase the cycle length? How many phases would there be? And overall, whether or not there's an all pedestrian phase or pedestrian scramble does not change the cycle length. Again, we're going to need to match the cycle length for the corridor. Really, that's driven by 23rd Street and 15th Street. So having an all pedestrian phase, the barn stance, doesn't change the cycle length. And to answer the other questions, with the pedestrian scramble, there will be 3 phases. There would be northbound and southbound traffic along Route 1 would be 1 phase. The second phase would be east and west along 18th Street vehicle phases. And then the third phase would be the scramble, where all the pedestrians and bicyclists could occur without conflicts from the vehicles. So to kind of put together some more data for you all, I know there was a lot of questions about this. We have these 2 tables that's shown on the screen. The top table shows the proposed pedestrian crossing time as a percentage of the cycle length. And the 2 different scenarios we showed was the pedestrian scramble, and then without the pedestrian scramble and vehicular phase, assuming a 10-second LPI. And with the pedestrian scramble, about a third of the time, a little less than a third of the time, 47 seconds of the assumed cycle length of 160, that would all be protected crossing. There would be no vehicle conflicts with that. So 47 seconds, all protected. With the bikes and pedestrians going with the vehicle phases, you'd only have that 10 seconds of the LPI where it's truly protected without vehicle crossings. And then the remainder of the time, 33 seconds, that would have potential for right turn conflicts with that. Overall, the crossing time would be very similar, 47 to 43 seconds, roughly, a little over a quarter to a third, slightly higher with the pedestrian scramble. The other information we pulled from our analysis is proposed pedestrian crossing times when you're looking at it from a diagonal standpoint. So we compared the travel times and delays from our simulations for 3 different scenarios. The first is with the pedestrian scramble for the diagonal movement, the pedestrian scramble for the diagonal movement, but without the diagonal crossing. So you would have to cross east-west and then north-south. So there would be 2 different crossings you would have to make. And then the third scenario is same thing. You would have no pedestrian phase, and you have to cross 2 stages to make that diagonal movement. And that last one has that 10-second LPI. So what we found was the overall travel time and delay with the all pedestrian phase was actually the shortest of all 3 of those scenarios, because instead of having to take 2 different times to cross, you can make that in 1 shot. So that's just some data from the analysis that we have to share related to the barn stance or pedestrian scramble. Moving north again to 15th Street at the Route 1, the next question was related to the eastbound movement and whether we needed to have the 2 eastbound left turn lanes and whether that was important from a vehicle standpoint. And is there anything we can do for bicycle pedestrian safety at this location? So yes, those 2 eastbound left turn lanes are very important. That's a very, very heavy movement from a vehicle standpoint. That's kind of the last opportunity to go from the west of Route 1 to the north, to either go north into the district or up Route 110. So that is very important that we need to keep those lanes. But there are a lot of opportunities for bicycle and pedestrian safety, which we've implemented here. We proposed no turn on red for the whole intersection, LPIs again for all of those, large median refuges. So, and the proposed lower speed limit. So there's a lot of safety measures that are being implemented along with this intersection. There was another question or comment related to whether or not in the southbound direction on Route 1, the rightmost lane could be a right turn only lane instead of a shared through and right. And we did look at that as some of the options based on earlier comments in the study. What we found was that we believe that the 3 through lanes is very important. It's part of the core capacity for the corridor. This is on the NHS system. So we think it's very important to make sure we have 3 through lanes. We did consider adding a right turn lane on top of that. Obviously, there's trade-offs with that. It's a wider crossing. So this is where we are with the recommendation for now, but that's certainly, if there's further comments on that, that can be looked at a little bit further closely. North of 15th Street, there were some questions about what happens to the concept north of here, especially related to bicycle pedestrian facilities. So this concept plan shows how the bicycle pedestrian facilities would continue north. What we anticipate with Route 1 going over 12th Street as it does today, that the facilities would separate from the road grade just shortly north of 15th Street, and they would go transition to street grade on the west side or the southbound lanes. That would be connecting at the 12th Street opposite of Army Navy Drive. On the east side of the road, on the northbound lanes, we would anticipate that connecting to Clark Bell here, a little bit further south of 12th. That also provides the opportunity to connect down to the planned Longbridge Drive bicycle facility that staff is planning. That would also connect to Mount Vernon Trail, the future bridge across the Potomac. So there's a lot of opportunities to connect the facilities along Route 1 further north with the other facilities that are existing and planned along to the north. On the west side, this obviously would connect to Army Navy Drive, all the facilities there. You could then you can get into the Pentagon to the west, other different facilities. So there's a lot of ways to circulate from there. And just, the Route 1 facilities would really enhance the network. Moving further north, there's lots of questions about the interchange. The first was, when will the 395 ramp be replaced? Just a reminder for everyone, the ramp that is structurally deficient is the southbound 395 to southbound Route 1 that I'm showing on the cursor here. This is the flyover that, is a high-speed flyover. The replacement of that is still pending. It's critical in the near midterm. There were some emergency repairs that were completed, but the replacement is still necessary. We don't have full funding at the time, so we don't have an exact timeline. There was a question related to, can the interchange project be done in advance of the Route 1 Urban Boulevard and the rest of the improvements to the south? And that's a possibility. Again, it's really funding related. Neither of the projects is fully funded at the moment. And the last question I wanted to highlight here at this location was, there was a comment about a request to add some language in the report regarding the potential, the 10th Street overpass for this potential new street. Again, not on any sector plan or anything. That was just an opportunity the project saw that could be provided in the future by others, is that that have bicycle pedestrian facilities along that street in the future. And we don't disagree. That's really not us at VDOT to make that decision. That's something for you all to pass to staff. And if that connection is made in the future, that's something that you all can work on with staff. So that's really kind of a little bit out of the hands of us at VDOT, but that's something that could be considered in the future for sure. And then backtracking a little bit to the southern end, just kind of rounding out the discussion about where the bicycle pedestrian facilities connect both to the north, but on the opposite end to the south. This is at the 23rd Street intersection. Again, our project limit is 23rd Street, so this is kind of the end of the project, and with logical tie-ins. So we really focused on having really strong bicycle pedestrian connections to 23rd Street, the bicycle facilities to connecting to existing facilities, having the really strong pedestrian facilities. South of here, we will provide the connections to the existing facilities on the west side of the road, connecting that existing sidewalk to that existing sidewalk on the ramp on the west side. There's a existing sidewalk. It's very narrow. It's kind of not great, but we'll create that connection. We will set the stage for the cross section that we have just south of the intersection. But we really anticipate people that are really going to bike and walk will use either Eads or Clark. That's really where the better facilities are. Again, a future project that comes along, we've set the stage to continue our cross section to the south, but right now that's just beyond the scope of what we can do going south of the interchange. So that's we try to answer as many questions as we can. Dan, I'll give you a chance to add anything else that I perhaps forgot or that you wanted to add on. So feel free to.
No, thanks, Jeff. That was great. So I guess we'll turn it over back to the backpack and open it up for questions.
Hi. Can you go over again what happens after 15, between 15th and 12th, and especially for bike paths who are on the west side? What happens? I mean, how do they get off of Route 1 before it becomes 395?
So one of the things that I think may not be clear in this version of the plan because it's so zoomed out is about halfway down the block between 15th and 12th, there's a little bit of a darker line there, and that is actually a retaining wall. So at a certain point, the sidewalk is going to start diving down while the road it goes up or continues at its current elevation over to 12th Street. So the sidewalk's going to start diving down to 12th Street and will connect at grade at the underpass at 12th Street.
And that'll be an accessible ramp?
Yes.
Good. And on the east side is actually going to be a connection to the future bike path over there?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. And
No
thank you
problem.
for managing to put most of our questions into a very compact, useful explanation. We look forward to studying your slides.
Great.
Other questions? Yeah.
I have some quick questions. One, can you make the speed limits consistent at the southern end that where you don't currently have the speed study and you're going to do the speed evaluation and then see about doing a speed study? But I'm asking, do you need to do the formal expensive speed study in order to make a determination that you're just going to make the speed limits consistent for that entire stretch?
No, unfortunately, there is a requirement in the code where we need to look at it formally before we change speeds. So unfortunately, it needs to go through that process if we're going to look at changing the speeds.
Okay, and VDOT is not willing or able to cover that cost?
Yeah, it is not part of the project budget at this point.
Okay. Second question, will VDOT fund transit service improvements as part of the TDM program?
I think that remains to be seen. I don't want to say no, but it is not currently part of our suite of TDMs. Jeff, do keep me on track here, but I don't believe that was one of the things that we were looking at the moment.
I don't think that was part of it. This area has very transit rich between all of the different modes, the different services. I think when we looked at it from the feasibility side, that we didn't think the additional service was needed. But Kyla, more involved in the TDM, so correct me if I'm wrong. But
and that's not to say That's
mean,
not to say it can't be included later if it's needed in order to meet the TDM goals. Sorry, I interrupted somebody.
no, I think that should be considered, that those of us who have spent much of their lives on buses know that there's absolutely room for improvement, and that people are not going to move to buses unless bus service is better. So I think that would be a really nice thing to consider. My third question is automated enforcement. I know we've discussed that a bit in the past, but as you talk about, you know, where the police are going to be hiding out and so on, did we ever like get permission from this state, or is that something that we could ask for to do more automated enforcement in this location?
So there's a couple items on automated enforcement. So the only thing that's permitted right now at the state level for speed enforcement is school zones and work zones. Outside of that, there's no authority to have automated speed enforcement. Red light cameras are a separate matter, and actually both speed enforcement and red light enforcement are all operated by the localities. So red light enforcement is something that Arlington would have to be willing to implement and manage. And there was a specific question in what came over to us about whether right turns on red could be, well, actually, I think it was, if there's no right turn on red, can the cameras enforce people making a right on red anyway? And I actually don't know the answer to that. So we are looking into that and can provide you an answer in the comment responses.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Dan.
Terry?
Yep. So I think I don't think that the county or the city has the ability to enforce or come up with their own code for red light enforcement. I think it still has to come from Virginia, and then it could be implemented by the cities and towns. So it's still a code thing that the state has to pass.
Okay.
They have passed it.
They've passed it for schools and work
red
zones,
lights.
but not in general.
And
I don't think.
For red light cameras.
So yeah, Terry, red light cameras, there's already some in Arlington. I know along Columbia Pike that Arlington is operating. I just don't know. The specific question we got was about right turns, and I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I got a couple. Hey, Dan. Yeah, the red, the right on red is a problem because if you look at 12th Street and Army Navy, you have there's a red right arrow that gets honored like like California stops. But when I was reading your report today, the analysis seems to ignore the potential traffic to Army Navy Drive that you're going to generate with the new right turn or right exit off 395. That's now going to put the people coming south on 395 and getting onto Route 1 north of that exit to Army Navy Drive. So they're gonna, to avoid traffic a little later on, they're gonna take that exit and go and get on Army Navy Drive. And it also seems to ignore the new VDOT connection at Boundary Channel, where people will get off 395 closer to the river, get on Boundary Channel, then come down on Long Bridge. Because in both cases, your analysis didn't look at those potentials. Could you possibly tweak that a bit?
So I'll let Jeff answer this. He's a little more familiar with the traffic aspect.
Thank you.
Yeah, Anthony, if you're able to answer, I think that we did look
Sure.
at the connection to Army Navy Drive and Boundary Channel, but please elaborate.
Yeah, both of those connections are in the regional travel demand model and were modeled. We looked at these actually considering this exact question of, hey, could we shift traffic or would there be a shift in traffic? And the model actually suggested very little additional demand. I'll take the Army Navy drive connection first. There are, while they're not particularly well signed, there are existing paths to go from southbound 395 to the north side of Pentagon City. Probably the most direct way is to basically take the ramp to the Pentagon parking lot and loop around. Or you can go Arlington Ridge Road and come in the backside that way as well near the River House. For the connection at Boundary Channel Drive, that connection, other than during the period of construction, is largely in place existing. The Longbridge Drive exists today and connects to Boundary Channel and existed before the project went into place. So we did consider, would there be a shift in demand to those facilities as a result of a change in capacity on Route 1, and did not see much of that, like to the tune of like 5% or less in our models.
Okay, then could you show it in your graphics? Thank you.
Yeah, let us go back and look at that. I'm not sure. It's something we can consider.
And I guess, yeah, I'll see to anybody else who wants to jump in. But I have one more.
I have one
Go for it.
small question. I guess,
Jillian's hand.
okay. And we'll get to that. When you were talking about the speed study early on in your discussion, you mentioned that you wanted to check out, I guess, first, what the prospect of success was in doing a speed study. What do you mean by that? What do you consider success?
I'm not a traffic engineer, and actually, it's none of the guys that are on the call today are part of that process. It's another part of it's actually VDOT Traffic Engineering who's looking at that, and I think they're just looking at the metrics of whether they think that it would be approved. And I can't say that I fully understand all the aspects of what would go into that. But we will provide whatever the results of that process are to Arlington, and they can say whether they agree or disagree and whether they want to move forward based on the information that we have.
But just to follow up, would success be a reduction in speed? Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. I guess we'll have
Jillian. Go for Jillian.
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. Two questions. The first is on some of your graphics in this presentation, in particular the one showing the intersection with 20th Street, it didn't show any bike infrastructure. I'm hoping that was just a mistake and that you haven't taken the bike infrastructure out of the plans. Yeah.
So the bike infrastructure is shown here on Route 1 as the light gray lines behind the green. I'm trying to remember. I don't know that we've ever shown bike infrastructure on 20th Street itself.
Oh, just the picture you're showing here doesn't have any bike infrastructure.
So, Jeff, can you point to the gray for the cycle track?
I see it
Yeah.
on the map, but you
Yeah.
also have a rendering. The rendering doesn't have
Oh.
any.
It's here. Kind of hard to see.
So
on the
is
page.
this rendering what you're expecting to show? Like those crosswalks are not going to have separated bike markings, that it's just going to mix when it comes to the intersections?
So this was
So
the
maybe-
only, this is the only intersection of all of them where we do not have the protected intersection geometry.
And part of it's because of the constraints of those existing buildings.
So
including the new
So-
the new building on the southeast corner.
So you're saying the bike infrastructure just disappears at the intersection?
We will have to terminate it and have a mixing zone at those corners, yes.
Okay, that seems problematic for lots of reasons, not least of all, that even putting aside the conflict between people biking and people walking, at times of day where there's not a lot of people walking and the people biking are coming at higher speeds, if you don't have any delineation for the people and vehicles at the intersection to expect people biking, then you could very easily end up with a very preventable crash. So I hope you guys will reconsider that, especially at the intersections on the asphalt, having more indication that there will be people biking here. Because what you have on the asphalt right now, you know, the message to drivers will be people are walking here. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I guess we can go back and take a look and see if there's a way to squeeze in some sort of symbology for bikes. As you can see, so the top right corner by the Consumer Technology Association, unfortunately, that handicap ramp ends up being so big that it ends up being in the line of the cycle track, for example. So that's one of the reasons that that facility ended before it got to the corner. So there's just a lot of constraints here, and we're not going to take that building in order to expand this further. So this is just an unfortunate corner where we're just really constrained. But I don't know, maybe there are some other types of markings that we can provide. You know, maybe crossing Route 1, maybe there's a way to get a green paint in there.
Yeah, it just seems like there should be space to at least put green paint when you get to the asphalt. But you're just, this to me looks like a recipe for conflict. And it's, you know, you're already giving a lot of space to exactly the modes of transportation that cause the most greenhouse gases and cause the most safety problems. And so, you know, forcing the other modes of transportation to mix when we're short on space is really not the goal here. And causing conflict like that was not what has been discussed up until now. So it really does need to be a continuous bike infrastructure, clear indication to drivers in the intersections to expect people biking. And yeah. And then the other question I had was about the ramp down to 12th that you were talking with Pam about. I'm mainly worried about the personal security aspects of that, the safety in terms of, is that going to be well lit? Is it going to be, are the sight lines going to be good? Is it going to be monitored, or is it going to feel like a scary, dark tunnel that people are very suddenly forced into?
I don't know why. Well, it may be very similar to the 15th Street ramp that they have now, where you come up from 15th Street onto Route 1, and that it will be a ramp up next to a retaining wall. But we certainly haven't gotten into the level of detail where we have evaluated lighting and how much we're going to provide at that point. So some of that gets into the real detailed design that we don't have yet. Other than that, I'm not sure how else to answer you at this point.
Okay. Do you have women on your design team? I feel like I haven't seen any women present for you guys.
We do.
Yeah, actually, we have Kyla on tonight.
Kyla's on, yeah.
Oh, okay, great. Okay, well, hopefully you can put that in, because it, you know, if you design something that is not safe from a personal security aspect, then it's not usable by a large segment of the population.
Yeah, and hopefully with redevelopment, as more and more properties start to embrace Route 1, this will become less and less of an issue, where we can look at some different treatments along that section of Route 1. But we did want to provide the connectivity for anyone who wants to travel further north on Route 1.
Right, but you just have to make sure you design it so that it does work for anyone, not just people who, are brave enough to walk down the cavern.
Yeah.
Great,
Understood.
thank you.
No, we've run out of time. I'll follow up with Dan.
Okay. Any more?
Yeah.
There was questions in the chat.
Okay.
Billions hands still up.
Sorry, that was just a remit.
So
There is one in the chat about connectivity to Army Navy Complete Street project. So hopefully we've kind of explained how that dips down to 12th. And as far as the details to connect to the Complete Street, I don't know that we've gotten that far in the design. That'd be something that handled in detailed design.
All right. Well, thank you very much. We do appreciate your time and responding to our questions.
Been very
Yeah.
helpful. Thank you.
Anytime.
Look forward to getting your slides. No, don't say that. We really appreciate that you did this on short notice.
Yes.
Yeah, no, thanks for having us again.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Take
Have a
care.
good night.
Yep. Good night.
All right. You want to move on to the next one?
Yeah. So next.
So we have the same.
So this one says Mary's next.
Yeah, that was the old one.
Okay. That's-
Yeah.
Somehow that came out. Yeah. So let's move
Yes,
to
yes.
so the Barcroft Department
Okay.
will be the next one. Yeah, I was a little surprised.
You put our slide deck up. David.
Okay, so we're going to.
Barcroft, yeah.
Okay, they're on here.
And we are very grateful to have Mike and Pam going to all the meetings and doing a huge amount of work on Barcroft Apartments. Really, really
This is the same.
tremendous job.
Was PowerPoint was PDF?
Yeah.
This is.
I think PDF. Oops,
Use like a PowerPoint.
I can't read from here.
Okay, well,
So this should probably also.
yeah, just tell they got it.
I don't,
Go down to the bottom where
I can't see from this far.
you go point
Yeah, can you see?
down to the
There you go.
Ah, at the very-
There we go.
Steal his
Thank you very
mouse.
much.
All
All
right.
right. All right. Thanks.
Okay, so, yeah, the Barcroft Apartment project, well, it's not really even a project, I'll explain that, but it's a big thing.
Hey, Mike, I hate to interrupt, but
Sure.
if there's a presentation, it's not being shared. Thanks.
So we have to do something different.
Share the screen.
Yeah. And
You need to get back into the team site.
we go back to Teams. Share screen.
I didn't mean to derail Mike. If Mike wants to keep
That's
talking.
good.
Thank you.
I can get back on, that's fine. Well, I'll talk while he's doing that. So anyway, the project is a long-term project. So Barcroft's development is a huge piece of property, a single owner. We have statistics on one of the slides, but basically it's that large group of apartments between Columbia Pike, Como Run, and
Share screen again.
George Mason Drive. It's been under a single ownership for years. And it came up for sale. I believe the owner had passed. But anyway, with some Amazon money and some county money, a provided some loan money for a developer to purchase the property. You can go to the next slide when you get a chance. David, I think you'll have enough going on, but, okay, so background, so 1335, the owner has kept, this has been on market rate, but they've kept it affordable, you know, all through this. So it was important to the county to kind of do what they could to maintain these affordable properties. So a deal was made, Arlington County, Amazon, and the developer, who's J.O. Lynch, who purchased the property. Big picture is county and Amazon loan them a bunch of money with the promise that they would preserve all the affordable units that are there now for 99 years. But to do that, they have to do some redevelopment in order to pay back and everything else. So anyway, go to the next slide, David. So this land use study and the expanded working group, I'm trying to explain to some folks, this is something between an area plan and a site plan approval. It's kind of a weird in between. So as you'll see, we got to see some things, but not all things and what the plan's going to be. Because they're going to be developing this thing over many, many years. And so this is just a point at which the county is going to approve some of the concepts. And basically, there was a lot of focus on places where the plan deviates from existing planning documents, whether that be the form-based code, all the various Columbia Pike plans, Pike plan, PED plan. Go to the next slide. So the what they've shown so far basically is conservation areas, which is which are the parts of the development that they're not going to change in terms of the buildings. They're going to renovate the buildings, but they're going to stay same size, shape, and then which areas they're going to redevelop. For the ones they're going to redevelop, they're just giving us sort of heights and footprints. That's it, no more architectural details than that. And then an emphasis on vehicular and bicycle and ped circulation. So basically, they're trying to nail down the site concepts at this point and get county's approval of it, which will be happening later this year. And that's our opportunity to comment on these items. So unlike a site plan where you get a lot more detail, this is going to be a little more general. Next slide. So this is gives you an idea of where we are. And this thing is sideways, so you got to kind of wrap your head, kind of try to look at it this way. Columbia Pike runs up and down on the left-hand side. So north is to the left. South George Mason is at the top of the page and kind of swings down and then intercepts 4 Mile Run at the bottom to the right of the page. So it's that whole development. It's everything within that block, and then there's that triangle of development on the other side of George Mason, sort of between George Mason and Doctor's Run when it kind of resurfaces, kind of runs through the center of that. And then if you remember, you know, the community garden plots are across the street from that, if you remember that area. So that's basically the area. And this is their commitment. So, sort of the yellow area and some of the pink hatched areas are what they're calling conservation areas, which those are the areas the buildings are going to stay and the roads are going to kind of stay the way they are. And they're going to try to keep the character of the community as best they can. Out to the edges, basically the upper corner at Columbia Pike and George Mason, and the lower corner where Columbia Pike hits 4 Mile Run. That's where like the Goodwill is and that stuff. That stuff's going to get redeveloped into larger buildings. Next slide. And then for these new buildings, they've already made some, they're making, I guess, a commitment at this point as to the height they're looking for. So basically, they're trying to match sort of what's there existing. So the top left is across the street from where the Harris Teeter is, the new Harris Teeter, where Food Star used to be. And that's what do we decide that was? That's a 5-story building, 6-story. So it's close to what they're planning for across the street. The old U-Haul lot is sort of part of this and sort of not, but they're saying that's going to be a similar size building. And then the other corner, similarly 8 to 10, but you'll notice when you get down on 4 Mile Run, and that's across 4 Mile Run, the road 4 Mile Run, from those really tall buildings that sit down there on the creek. They're proposing actually 14-story buildings there, so they will be as tall or maybe a little taller than those really tall buildings on.
And it's very steep.
And it's very steep. Yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about what's the steepness. Okay, go to the next page. So this is the existing vehicular kind of map. There are a few major thoroughfares through this, and I'm going to forget names. real quick. Yeah, the main one's Thomas, which is the one that kind of the snake-shaped one in the middle there that's orange. Coming down from the top is 12th Road, which they're going to call 12th Street, which is confusing, but right now it's 12th Road. And then a few other smaller roads that kind of go in and circle through. Many of these, if you've been in there, have parking along them, either straight in or diagonal. So they feel more like parking lots, some of them, than they do like roads. Go to the next slide. So this I grabbed from the bike elements. I'll give staff credit. They bring up the bike element and the other elements every meeting. So the staff is reading our planning documents. Okay. But this is what we had in the bike element. Now, this is 90 degrees off again, so sorry about that. But what we had said in the bike element was we wanted bike facilities along George Mason, which is in the plan, at least on one side. But then we anticipated a bike facility that went along 12th Road. And where 12th Road crosses George Mason, right now there's nothing. And then to the right, between George Mason and Quincy, it's woods. There's nothing there. Now, it looked like from the bike element, that might be a paper street because we had actually called it out as a bike lane on a roadway, for what it's worth. So but we had anticipated that throughput, and then getting to Thomas, taking a short jog, and then down what is now kind of an access road, but that's very steep. So that's, to their credit, they took what we had proposed and tried to give us as close to that as they could. So go to the next slide and see what they're proposing at this point. So now you got to turn your head back 90 degrees again. Sorry about that. So Quincy is off the page to the top. Right, and they're showing a bike facility coming through the woods there. Well, no, that existing bike facility is there. So I should have mentioned that. So that's that really steep path that comes through Doctors Run Park. And then it goes to the Hawk Signal, existing Hawk Signal at George Mason. So that's there. They're showing a path going basically next to the 7-Eleven or kind of, through the woods there. They don't really show what it does because it leaves their development. And that's not something they're going to build. So one of the issues with this is dependent on the county building that. Some kind of crossing on George Mason there, whether that's a Hawk Signal or something new, at least a crosswalk. Then it comes up 12th Road, as we had put in the bike element. That part's the same. When it gets to Thomas, though, instead of doing that little jog over and down, it goes the other direction and goes down. So that purple part is new. And then you see it kind of hits Wakefield, thank you. And then just sort of dumps you on Wakefield, and then dumps you down to 4 Mile Run Minor, which is, if you know that area, there's 4 Mile Run, there's a WNOD, and then 4 Mile Run Minor is that little road that kind of goes above the WNOD. So they dump us with no bike, barely has any bed facilities. There's nothing on that road.
We did have some significant traffic when we were there.
Oh, yeah.
Right. Well, and I think the buses line up there. There are a bunch of,
2 bus stops.
yeah, so not ideal. The other, so then they jump you on there, and then you're supposed to work your way down until you can get on the WNOD. That's the current plan. The other thing is from George Mason, the green dotted line to the top of the hill is a hill. It's a decent low gear hill to get up there. The purple line is super steep the other direction. Like, I think you make up probably more elevation in that short purple than you do in the long green. It would be, I mean, it's Superman Hill steep. I think it's, I don't know, it seemed like it was steeper than Superman Hill. And it's shorter. So it's, so you're on the scary short section, then they dump you on. So that part is not ideal. And we'll talk about that a little bit later. And then I'm showing any other bike facilities throughout the site, which we had some issues with. You go to the next slide. I'll let you pick up on this. Yeah.
Right, this is the biophilic connection. If you haven't been on the site, I recommend looking at it. It is gorgeous. It is extremely hilly. It is original garden apartments. The buildings are in reasonable shape. The grounds are in reasonable shape. It's beautiful, but it's terribly hilly. So there are only a few available places to put roads, past whatever. What happened during the form-based working plan is gradually they evolved the idea of a biophilic connection, which is basically the green ribbons that we're talking about in my neighborhood. So that they're taking these are all pretty much existing pathways or streets, with Thomas being that curving one towards the bottom, and really providing better sidewalks, possibly better bike facilities, and really making it lush and green. And the illustrations that they have on their slides are really nice. So this is a good thing. That would include, you can see the intersection going, I guess that's east down 12th Street. That would also be part of the biophilic connection. And it would be for vehicles, bikes, and pedestrians. So and lots of greenery. And then it looks like it's crossing George Mason. Then of course you got the park on the other side. That's going to be green. And the connection to the extension of the 12th Street Bike Boulevard over there. Then to the right a little bit and down is it's not a street, it's a pathway. And if you saw the first slide, I don't think that might be part of it, but it's an example of how they might do it. Currently, there's a lot of steps. So we can add more trees and green it up, but it's very steep. All of these areas are very steep. You can't really easily do more than steps, but that's an issue for us. We want them to figure out how to do more pathways. And if you can go back a couple to the vehicular, yeah, back one more. Okay, this is the vehicular pathway, and you can see that 12th Street, and then you can see Taylor, which is the first one that goes off on the right, and the next one is an alley that goes off on the right, curves around and connects to Thomas. Those should be great vehicular connections. They're the lower one just right above Thomas is an alley. It doesn't have a sidewalk now. It should have a sidewalk according to their own guidelines. Wakefield above it does have sidewalks on both sides. It also has parking. It's really tight to go anywhere. So now go back to the biophilic, please. So you can see a lot of that is not on this map, even though it should be. And the connection that's west of Thomas going down off of 12th Street. Is that the same one as the bike one, or is that a little bit different?
I think it's the same.
That part's the same.
Yeah.
Then they say that pedestrians can continue further down into the alleyways of these buildings, but that again is super steep. Not sure how that would work. But they're talking about at least that part being green, but it's so steep, I don't know how it's going to work. And the way over on the right, where Thomas comes down to 4 Mile Run Minor, you can barely walk down those sidewalks. It is so steep. And the access there is terrible. So one of our issues is we want to help the people who live there and make sure that they create paths that are accessible all the way through it and follow perhaps more of these natural streets than some of these other things, and create paths around these stairways. So that's the biophilic. Okay, this is for talking about. You really have to go there. It is incredible. It's this big hill. It is incredibly steep. And I like this slide because you see the wavy lines. Those are the topographic lines. And in the lower corner on the left side, you can see how steep it is going from the yellow down. It just line after line after line. It's very steep. You can, some of the numbers are on it. The top Yellow is around Thomas, and that is basically a plain. It's relatively level. It's fairly big. But once you get off that, it's really steep very quickly. And it's 200 feet tall right there. And it goes down to almost 100 feet by the time you get to the bottom. And it's a fairly short distance and a lot of stuff to go over. So that's one of the big challenges here. This also shows their proposed neighborhoods, George Mason Place, the Greenway, and Wakefield. The places where they are building are kind of on the corners and relatively level. But the main site, and especially kind of the southeastern edge, is super. Next slide. And the area has had landslides. They had one in 2022 and 2024. They did a presentation to the FNRC in April about the project, and how they're going to deal with the landslides hasn't been resolved yet. They're not sure how they can really be planted or how because of the landslides, they've lost parts of the alley and parts of the Taylor Street that go through that are great connections around the site and a relatively level area. And you can't really do a lot of what they want to do until they fix this. So hopefully they're going to be fixing this.
Can I ask?
Sure.
Can they do something Lombard Street like, kind of create some switchback?
Well, I think switchbacks is what they need to do for some of the stairs. I don't think this can be solved for switchbacks.
And we could charge tourists a toll.
Yeah, and David Howell, who's on the working group, has said that basically it's going to be very hard to plant things there and have them thrive because it's really damaged area. Hopefully they will fix this. So now we are going back to the next slide. And we're what?
Back?
No, forward. Sorry. And you want to continue?
Yeah. So 4 Mile Run Drive minor is a big deal, not only because of what we've already talked about, but as I recall, they're going to put 2 14-story buildings and however many people that is right on 4 Mile Run Minor and dump them basically as pedestrians out onto that street. So one of the big deal is can you fix 4 Mile Run Minor? Now there was some talk about, well, that's sort of outside the development, that's a county road, we up to us. But there's a big drop even from 4 Mile Run Minor down to the WNOD. And to build these 14-story buildings, they're going to have to excavate that whole area out, I'm assuming. So can you bring 4 Mile Run Minor down to the WNOD, closer, flatten it out, widen it, and put facilities on it, both for peds and bikes, to make that actually a nice corridor through there. That could help with a lot of this if they could do that. There was talk about they would have liked to have made an 11th Street connection up to Columbia Pike. If you look at the map, we can go back to the map, but basically this entire mega block is one development except for this little square that sits on Columbia Pike, which if you remember, there was a house there for a long time and it got torn down and they built probably the ugliest townhomes I've ever seen.
Yes.
But that's outside. So 11th Street can't go through. Steep slopes we've talked about, narrow internal streets and alleys with parking, and a lot of that's within that conservation zone, so you can't mess with the buildings. So we're not sure. And then the other issue that we didn't raise is that the community, their biggest deal is parking, because a lot of them have construction jobs or other jobs where they really need to drive. A lot of service vehicles. If you ever drive along George Mason there, it's all service trucks. So they're trying to maintain as much parking as possible. So it's real controversial. We can't just take that parking away. So that's a struggle. A lot of the sidewalks are 2 foot wide?
The internal paths are about 2 feet wide.
2 foot wide. And
the basic sidewalks everywhere are no more than 5 feet. Even the ones on George Mason and 4 Mile Run Minor. The only one that has great sidewalks, because they've been done recently, is the one on Columbia Pike.
Yeah.
Which is humongous, but it's all hardscape.
Okay, you go to the next slide. So general, I'll let you do the general advocacy one, and I'll do the specific one. This is more general, right?
How they do?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Okay, basically, we would like to send a letter to the county manager, as all letters are, covering some of these issues. We want to promote optimal bike facilities and connectivity for the site and its surroundings. We want to support the current residents, and we will share these slides. The surrounding neighborhoods and those of us who actually pass through the site. We want to advocate for accessibility everywhere, especially on the site, but also all facilities should be safe, comfortable, connected on maps that match desire lines. And as we have said, the 4x1 minor is like the #1 street that needs to be fixed. Doing a better 12th Street bike boulevard is important, and the Wakefield Place connection. How that works on both ends is difficult.
Right.
Next slide.
Next slide.
Thank you.
So more specific. So the issues I had around 12th Street. So there's no use in putting a nice 12th Street facility in if the county doesn't do the connection through to Quincy. However, that needs to be done. And that, I think that's county-owned property. That's the north end of the park. It's not used. I know that people that object to anytime we pay parkland, but I think that could be done. Proposed bike route is relatively steep along 12th Street, very steep on Thomas. I think they need to come up with a better route than what they showed, even though part of it's what we showed in the bike element, to be honest with you. But, as Pam had noted, 13th Street and 12th and Taylor, they kind of run along the contour. So actually, if our goal is to get 12th Street connected to the WNOD, the existing path, the existing Hawk signal to Taylor, and then a bike facility on Taylor that took you around and got you down to 4 Mile Run Minor would be a better route, an actually more bikeable route than what they've currently planned. So we want to propose that. And for those, I think everybody knows this, but that is the end of the 12th Street Bike Boulevard, which is at this point almost continuous. We've gotten it. It's pretty close. You still that Bobaditas area. You can't get through there yet, but if that ever gets redeveloped, we've got something. It's not perfect all the way, but something all the way from Quincy all the way, and it will connect up with the bike facility that goes around the golf course, which has its own problems, but at least, stairs and all, but whatever. But it would be nice to have 12th Street Avenue all the way through, and this would be the last connection that would get you to WNOD at least. Talk about 4 Mile Run Minor. So those are our main specific recommendations, or we'd like to make those the recommendations of the thing committee.
And next. And again, these are the pedestrian accessibility and connectivity issues. A lot of them are already the same as bike ones, the main one being the 4 Mile Run Minor sidewalks. There is no sidewalk, bus stops, they're way too narrow. They do not match the form-based code guidelines at all. And once they put these 14-story buildings right there, the sidewalks are going to have to be way bigger. And it's one of the things I was walking around there is the importance of having access to 4 Mile Run Minor if you're living down the hill. You're not going to want to go back up the hill over to Columbia Pike. You're going to get down to 4 Mile Run Minor and go around. It's much easier. And I saw a woman struggling to get her baby carriage over the ground and then down Thomas to get to 4 Mile Run Minor. And then if you go around and look at her building, she has these huge staircases that come up from 4 Mile Run. There's no way that you can do that with a bike or with a baby carriage or anything. They really need to work on that. And for everyone, it needs to be more accessible and more usable. The sidewalks on the site need to be wider. That the main ones can be just 5 feet wide or 6 feet wide, which is their guidelines. And also for alleys, it says their guidelines, unlike the pedestrian element says that there should be a sidewalk in an alley, and that would really help. And there's 6 foot wide sidewalk. Who knew? But only on one side. And they have all these existing pathways that connect the buildings to the main sidewalks, which are really tiny, and those should be 5 feet wide minimum. And that again is in their own guidelines, and perhaps they're already doing this, but we want to make sure all this happens. And everything, as much as possible, should be as fully accessible as possible, and use ADA compliant paths and utilize some lanes back and forth. That would be great. Certainly, you can keep some stairways. They are beautiful. They're functional for people who are able to manage them, but you need alternatives. Otherwise, you're just really stuck. And our final slide. All right. We would like to draft a letter. And I guess Mike and I can draft something.
Yeah, we'll draft something up. Well, I guess one question we need that, we're doing 1 letter or 2 letters? I'm assuming 1 letter.
I think we can do 1 letter. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. For whatever reason, we are sharing a position on this. That is
Yeah, it was one.
really weird. So all the things that we talked about, your general support for the project, cite the specific concerns, and advocate for the best possible stuff. Want to note that there is on May 27th, there's a joint meeting of the Transportation Commission and NRC. And I also noticed that posted tonight, there's going to be a meeting this coming Monday. That is an LRPC meeting for the site, which would also be good to attend. You and I should attend, if nothing else, if you want to follow it. But this is.
So this was last month?
Yeah, it's an old meeting.
Oh, I'm sorry. We didn't catch that. Oh,
Well, you can still promote that meeting if you like.
We'll all make a commitment to attend.
I'm sorry.
I mean, that's-
Other than May, what can I say? Apologies for that.
Is this
Catch.
on
Thank
June
you. Yes, June 27th, and there's one next Monday. At some point. And we would probably like to continue to participate as much as possible. I don't know if that is an option, but that's something we also like to. It's not clear. We may be done.
Yeah, no, yeah, this process, like I said, was odd. So they're supposed to be making the rounds to all the committees, but we're not one of the ones they're making the rounds to.
They couldn't do us tonight because they were doing.
Yeah. So, yeah, but then at this point, they're going to take whatever this group comes up with, and there's not a consensus document or a group document that I know of. It's just individual comments. And then they're going to go to it goes to the board later this year to sort of approve this concept. And basically it's sort of approval to deviate from the published planning documents is the way I saw it. Because they were very clear on, one case code said this, but we're going to do this instead, kind of thing. Then I think we're just going to see individual projects over the next up to years roll out that will hopefully be
For
compliant.
the big buildings.
For the big buildings. The other, they're doing renovations all the way through. But
If this is going, if we're writing this to the county manager, but the county board is going to be approving this, is there a process that we can send that to the board? Can we do that through the Transportation Commission, or is that?
Yeah, I mean, we often copy Chris Lett and he forwards things out.
Okay.
And again, we can obviously copy the project staff. So if someone can give us a motion just to have us develop this letter, get it going.
So moved. Second.
All right, we'll do it. Oh, anybody against it?
I think there were at least 2 of us online who had our hands up to talk about stuff.
okay.
Okay, please.
We can't see it on our screen right now.
Sorry.
Yeah, we're all PowerPoint here, so.
Yeah, oh, you can close this if we're done.
Just go back to Teams. Hit stop share. Stop share. There's a blue at the top.
Blue button, stop sharing. Thank you very much. You're my nice thing.
So just a little bit of feedback for me. One is I don't know why Arlington is still building streets in 2024. I just think we should not build streets for cars anymore. And admit that climate change is real and building streets encourages people to drive. So I'm disappointed that this plan includes at least one new street, if I understand it correctly. I think the better plan would be to look at ways to restrict traffic on streets that serve as primary parts of the bike and pedestrian network. Number one. Number two, I would love to see some creative thinking about ways to deal with the topography challenges by using the buildings that will be built. So, for example, if there's a building that is to be built where the building would span the bottom of the hill to the top of the hill, if there's a way to negotiate an easement to use the elevator.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. So actually have a bike way through the building.
Yeah, you create actually like
Yeah.
a plaza that's
Right.
like between the buildings, and you can use that to, people can use that to go up and down.
Yeah, and it also seems to me like they should want to build the buildings there. Like the landslide, I mean, I'm not an architect or an engineer or an expert on these things, but it seems like the area that has issues with planting and the topsoil is prone to landslides, but the bedrock is solid. It seems like a great place to build a building where they take off the top layer anyway. And then they can navigate elevation changes that way. But anyway, that just saying that it would be good to look at creative solutions to the topography, like having a lobby on, like down the hill, a lobby up the hill, and an easement to use the elevator to get between the two would be great. And then the third thing that I wanted to say was the reason there are cars always parked or those light trucks and whatnot always parked on George Mason is because of Arlington parking rules. There are certain like light commercial vehicles are only allowed to be parked beside basically VDOT owned land or parkland. And so you will always see that stuff parked up because otherwise, other street parking is restricted to personal vehicles. And I don't think seeing people get a good deal on parking for their commercial vehicles is indicative that Arlington needs to be serving that market. In other words, they're parking for free on George Mason when they would have to pay for parking elsewhere, and they're just saving themselves money. Now, these are small businesses, and I do feel for them some, but when it comes to street safety and the need to use public space wisely, I just think that we should think hard about whether we're giving away public space in a way that makes sense, or whether we should think about it, whether there's better ways to do this. If we actually do want to provide free parking for these light commercial vehicles that service small businesses, great. Let's make a decision to do that and figure out the best way to do that, and not just preserve parking on a street because they park on that street now. And as we're building buildings, we can think about building underground parking if we need it, but mainly think about other ways to get around. So those are my 3 points.
Yeah, thank you for your comments. And we didn't really get into parking, and I'm not sure we want to. It's going to be a huge issue with the Transportation Commission because parking is a huge issue for the
Right,
project.
and the parking on George Mason is right now part of it. That's not going to change one way or the other. It's the interior parking that is critical to the residents. So.
But thank you for your suggestions.
Yeah.
Randy has
Randy?
I just wanted to thank Mike and Pam for all the work they've done on this. That they've really laid it out for us so that I think everybody can understand the issues, and they are obviously very much engaged and spending a lot of time on it. And I think we should all be appreciative of that. Secondly, on the question of parking, if those were BMWs and Lexuses and very expensive cars parked on George Mason Drive, I would say let's charge them money or something. But these are working people. they need a place to park the vehicle that they drive home. So I think we should have some sympathy with that. And lastly, I'd like to say that we should keep our eye very closely on the George Mason Drive bicycle facilities, because although the people who live in Barcroft Apartments are going to need to get in and out with bicycles, those of us who go around, because of the topography, if we don't have an electric bike, are going to go down George Mason to the relatively flat WNOD. So I think it's very important for us to make sure that the bicycle facilities that are eventually going to be built along George Mason are adequate for doing that. Thank you.
You, and we have one more person, Martin, and then I think we want to move on to our last topic.
Yeah, Randy kind of preempted my point, but yeah, just kind of what would a designated bicycle facility along South Taylor really get you over what the county is considering for just putting that path along the one side of George Mason for folks kind of going down Mason to get on the WNOD. Like there's not really compelling reason to cut into Taylor. And I kind of find it difficult to visualize, kind of given how narrow Taylor is with like the garages and retaining walls, that you could actually really fit much in there other than, painting a sharrow and saying go this way. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah, it's important to note, this is right now at 1,300 units, this is 1% of Arlington's population on a significantly smaller than 1% chunk of land. This is doing everything Arlington claims it wants to do everywhere right there. And Arlington needs to show the development right now some love with respect to bike parking.
Bike piles.
Yeah. So whatever the old programs we had to give bike parking, let's give bike parking. Thank you.
And that's also in their form-based code. There should be bike parking facilities. This is EV charging. Yep, all that. That's what I said.
Well, appreciate all your good work on this and also setting up the walkthrough the other day.
Our pleasure.
And Mary, do we have enough time to go over the comfort map here?
I think so. Well, Brian's actually has our presentation. Okay. So.
Yeah.
And we tried to make it quick, so.
I'll try to shave some more time off. A couple of months ago, Mary approached several of us in DES to help with the updates to the bicycle comfort level map that Arlington County has. We have our current bike comfort map that's shown here. The first bicycle comfort level map was created in 2015. And it was done in a collaboration between some of Arlington County's engineers, Bike Arlington, and also members of the community. It was the first map of its kind in the region. It highlighted the most stress-free routes to get around Arlington County. And the most recent map that I've shown here is from 2022. It's important to note now that the map ranks on-street bike routes and trails using 5 distinct levels, ranging from easy to challenging and to use caution and prohibited. I won't go into the details, but it's quite simple. It does a good job at conveying some of our easier routes and some of the most challenging routes that we have on our bike routes in the county. The bike comfort map is updated roughly every 2 years, and the BAC has often been called upon to review the proposed map and suggest some updates and changes. So to frame kind of the study for the new bike comfort map that we're proposing here tonight, staff studied bicycle level of comfort maps and indexes from several jurisdictions around the country. We were looking to capture a more comprehensive definition of comfort, other than by street type, speed, volume, which is what the current bike comfort map does. We felt that comfort wasn't well captured or quantified by the existing map, and we wanted to incorporate those additional factors in an index that would identify a route as being more or less comfortable to all cyclists. These include things like parking turnover rates, presence of bus stops and bus routes, slopes, adjacent zoning, bike infrastructure. This includes infrastructure at the intersections, but then also along the routes itself. Behavioral complaints, which are received through the county's Q Alert platform. And then also the presence of traffic control devices. And as I've noted at the bottom, quite a few more. In our analysis of all these bike level of comfort maps, we looked at the index developed through San Francisco's Active Communities Plan in partnership with Tool Engineers. And we are trying to capture something similar to what they have done. We have used their map, the index, and the methodology as a foundation for our own unique bike comfort index. This is what we've proposed so far. The index will consist of 3 separate subscores. Each one is intended to capture an important factor in determining bicyclist comfort on our roadways and trails. A score will be added to each street segment. And so we're taking the street segment layer from our county's ArcGIS database. And a street segment is the roadway between 2 intersections, typically. Sometimes it can be longer, sometimes it can be shorter, just to clarify. The first subscore that we have is the context. The second is traffic conditions and points of conflict along the street segments. And the third is the bicycle infrastructure along the street segments, intersections, and trails. All the information we have available to us in ArcGIS will be used to generate a bicycle level of comfort score. The information we are using comes from several departments within DES, like the Pavement Condition Index, which is maintained by Water, Sewer, Streets. Other data like driver behavior and observed traffic volumes and speeds are collected from third-party sources like Q Alert, but also streetlight data. That information is mapped and added to our bicycle level of comfort index. For other points like slope, traffic volumes, and speeds, we'll reference outside sources and authorities on those topics. For example, the National Association of State Transportation Officials has an All Ages and Abilities guidebook, which sets thresholds for comfortable speeds and volumes for bicycles, which will be incorporated into the score. And then in addition to this, we are working with our counterparts in San Francisco. We have a meeting set for later this week to discuss kind of the final parts of this index, which is the weighting of the scores, to produce a final bicycle level of comfort score for each of our street segments in the county. So now I just want to walk y'all through just a few examples of the subscores so you have an idea of what it is that's going to make this up. For the first one, we have the context subscore. Considers 4 factors that set the stage for a person's bicycling experience. First is the land use, which is the first indicator of the context subscore. These are the land use designations that are defined by the county's general land use plan and include designations for commercial, public, governmental, residential, mixed use, and service industrial and service commercial. The idea is that some areas are more desirable than others to travel to. But the more urban design in some areas is more supportive of bicyclists and of their comfort, things like street trees, benches, street lights, and that traffic in each of these land use areas is going to be a little bit different from the next. For example, if you're thinking of a service industrial area, you might not want to ride through it because you're going to have more dump trucks. You're going to have cement mixers. I'm thinking the road along Shirlington Road, for example.
Yeah.
That's right. And so different land uses create different types of traffic that you encounter. Second is the pavement quality. This is the GIS database that's maintained by Water, Sewer, Streets. And just simply as streets show more wear, as you see more potholes, as you see more cracks in the road, it would produce a lower score for that segment. And if a segment is recently paved, it'll produce a higher score for that segment. The third is the reported behavioral violations. We are taking these direct from our Q Alert platform. These are violations that we receive that are, for example, a car blocking a bike lane. Right now, the county doesn't really have a response to that, but it is something that we do track, and it's something that we want to incorporate in the index. The fourth one is the slope. This is the percent grade of a hill. The less percent of a slope there is for a segment, the easier the ride. I think that's easy to understand. The more slope that there is for a segment, the harder it is for a cyclist to ride. And I think what we want to look at the slope a little bit differently than some of the other scores, and that the slope will be multiplied into the score rather than added. So that if you're riding up Superman Hill, for example, it'll take points away from some of the other indicators that we have. So slope slope has a pretty big impact on the score. Just for an example of what this might look like, this is one of the factors that we have for this index, and that's land use. The scoring and the weighting is still to be determined until after our meeting with San Francisco. So you're looking at something that's likely hypothetical. The idea is that the residential land use areas are generally more comfortable to ride through than the service, industrial, commercial land use areas that are shown at the bottom of the screen. At the top of the screen it's part of the 12th Street Bike Boulevard network. It's leading up to Quincy, right near Randolph Elementary School. And the street is surrounded by residential land use areas that would score the highest number of points for a number of reasons here. Typically, these areas are shaded, have streetlights, and typically have fewer traffic conflicts than street segments that are surrounded by other land use categories. Often neighborhood streets are narrower than street segments surrounded by mixed use areas and service industrial areas, which does tend to improve traffic safety. And just one thing to keep in mind in the way that this index is meant to work is that not all neighborhood streets are the same, but for now we have to assume that they are generally more comfortable to ride along. There are some examples where we have higher recorded traffic volumes and speeds, but those will be captured in other elements of the bike comfort index. So that street, even though it is a neighborhood street now, it'll receive more points. In other parts of the index, it'll be knocked for those high volumes, it'll be knocked for those high speeds. Second is the traffic subscore. It considers 4 factors that have an impact on someone's feeling of comfort or discomfort. That's not right. It's a little bit more than 4. Many of these indicators are based on the low stress bicycling and network connectivity report produced by the Mineta Transportation Institute, which has widely determined the level of traffic stress, and it's what many jurisdictions around the country use to make their own level of comfort stress maps. There are quite a bit of these, so I'll just touch on them again briefly. One is the number of travel lanes. The more travel lanes there are, the more uncomfortable the segment becomes. To cyclists, think traffic volumes, traffic speeds, lack of shade, riding in heavy traffic, or riding behind the tailpipe of a car. The direction of travel lanes, is this a one-way street or does it support bi-directional travel and therefore more connectivity? Observed traffic volume. Preferred volumes are defined by NACTO, and those thresholds are reflected in our index. Same with traffic speeds. We also wanted to include parking. This creates potential conflict with cyclists. Think of cars pulling out of a parking space or someone opening a door into a bike lane. We also want to include the presence of bus stops, RRFBs, and then also take notice to the posted speed limit on the street segment. So,
I ask, so of the 3 things that you have, context, traffic, and infrastructure, which one has the focus on connectivity?
That would be the traffic subscore when we're looking at the direction of the travel lanes.
Okay, thanks.
Right, and so just real quick to show you an example of what the traffic volumes might look like and what the scores might look like. We've taken the all ages and abilities guidelines from NACTA to set the thresholds for each of these, I guess, buckets. The lower volume that we have, the more points the street will get. When we approach volumes of 6,000 or above, the street receives far less points. And the same table would be used for speeds as well. With that, we have the bicycle infrastructure subscore. Again, points will be added for street segments that have bicycle facilities More points for protected bike facilities, less points for bike lanes. Points are deducted for street segments or trails with fair weather crossings. So think of 4 Mile Run Trail in Carlin Park, the WNOD Trail underpass at Wilson Boulevard near Bon Air Rose Garden. That would lose points because of that fair weather crossing. Not all days is that crossing available to me. Some of the indicators that we're using for the bike infrastructure subscore, the bike facility type, the intersection bicycle facility types, whether it's a protected intersection, does it have green pavement markings to get you across the intersection? Is there a bike box or a 2-stage turn box? And then also fair weather crossings. And you know, it's not really visible on this, but right now what we do have is a draft map of what this might look like in the county. Most of the blue is going to be our level 1. These are the most comfortable. Level 4 is the least comfortable, and it includes red. We also have limited access roads, highways, and federal roads, which are gray, and those are all restricted or prohibited. So there's a level 1, which is the most comfortable. Level 4 is the least comfortable.
How are you defining federal roads? Because they're at Marshall in by Fort Myer and Arlington Cemetery is widely used by cyclists, is publicly available, and it's a federal road.
Good to know. I think right now most of Arlington Cemetery is all grayed out. It is something we can look at. I know Memorial Drive, the bridge connection through it is still available to cyclists, so it is blue on our map. We can really go over the roads and make sure that what we do have is accurate.
Thank you.
Right now, it's a GIS click. You know, is this federal? Is this VDOT? And within that, you know, is it I forget all the access road, for example, or 395. So it's just getting rid of all of that.
We do have a hand up here, unless do you want to finish a point before?
I was just going to walk you through just a couple of street segments that we have scored real quick, and then we can open up to questions. Okay. Thanks. So just to give you an idea of what our current index is showing us, this is a prohibited street. This is Arlington Boulevard. It's a limited access road. God bless you if you try it. So it sounds like we're in agreement.
I think bikes take a lane.
Yeah.
They gotta get it off Wanderer, that's why.
So you have a different definition of limited access than the legal one?
The definition that we're using for limited access is what we have in our GIS. So our GIS will have every roadway, street segment in the county classified under certain different types. Okay. All right, so let's start with level 4. We have, for example, this is South George Mason Drive approaching Arlington Boulevard. The reason it is a level 4 is because there are high volumes and speeds. There's multiple lanes of travel. It's also a signalized intersection, which does give it a few extra points. This is also where the bike lane ends. Just ahead is the merge. Our category for level 3, this is Wilson Boulevard. It does have a protected bike lane, which gets it some points, but right now it has a low pavement condition index score. There are a number of reported behavioral issues. There's also bus lanes and bus stops, which are sharing the bike lane. Our level 2, this is an example of North Woodstock Street. Does have it is a level 2 because it does have a bike lane, goes through a residentially zoned land use area. It has lower traffic volumes than what you might see on this Boulevard, for example. And then level 1, 4 Mile Run Trail. It's an off-street trail. This segment is relatively flat, and there's no fair weather crossing here. So with that, we have our next steps. We'll be meeting with San Francisco this week to discuss the weighting of the scores and how everything kind of meshes and combines together. After that meeting, we'll be able to produce a final map, which can be printed and then published online. And then we intend to share that map with the BAC for further input before it does go before it does go live. We've made notes of your earlier suggestions and can use some of that feedback to see if the street segment scores again align with some of your own experiences that you have on your bike. Kind of do that as an exercise. With that, we can start with Julian.
Thank you. Thanks so much for the presentation and for all of the thought that's gone into, you know, putting some objective standards behind the comfort map. A couple things. I didn't hear anything about bike volume, like that the volume of bike traffic on a route. And, you know, a lot of studies show that the number one indicator of safety for people biking is how many people are biking. I worry that not only are you not considering it, that you're actually inadvertently taking into account using it in a negative way by taking in the reported problems through report a problem. Because if no one's biking somewhere, then you're not going to get any reported problems of the things that are dangerous to people biking because no one's biking there. But for example, on Quincy, I report problems all the time because I'm already biking on Quincy, and you get lots of reports about Quincy because lots of people bike on Quincy. Have you guys thought about that?
No, we have not. When it
Okay,
comes to report problem, it's for some of these indicators that we have, we're pulling together all the information that we have available to us. And if we're not getting reports of problems along some of these bike lanes, and that, you know, that isn't necessarily delivering an accurate map. And so we are kind of requiring, or not requiring, but kind of requesting that we get more input. I guess when it does come to reporting behavioral violations along bike lanes.
But no, what I'm saying is you're actually discouraging people, but by using that as a negative, you're inadvertently discouraging people from biking in the places where it's safer to bike because more people are biking there. You're getting reports because there are more people biking there, and you don't have any other measure of the number of people biking. And so it ends up only coming into your formula as a negative, which is even worse than just not counting.
Yeah, well, unless you do it as a ratio, right? So if it's just a number, then she's exactly right. You're gonna have more numbers where there's more people. If it's a ratio.
Yeah, and there's a lot of ways to fix it, but what I'm hearing when he presented is that right now, the way they've structured it, it's exactly the wrong way.
But is there data other than
Well, I think what Brian was saying too is that, you know, all these scores are put together and then we make the map by using judgment on top of that. Right.
Judgment will verify.
Yeah.
Kind of what we have as a score.
Yeah.
And review and on bike experience.
Right.
And like all the things you've already told us about different roads.
And so the one thing with the reporter problem, and one thing we have yet to determine, is how many points we give to this kind of behavior, to the reported behavioral violations. Right now, we've only discussed 1 point. And so it's, yes, we're only getting data where data is reported, but is 1 point enough to really shift? It could in some cases, but I don't think it would. Is 1 point enough to, you know, kind of shift a bike facility from a level 1 to a level 2, or from a level 2 to a level 3? I think that's a question that we'll have to ask San Francisco to see if it's something that they considered, and something to also discuss internally. I think we'll take a look when we do have our final scores and final weights. We can take a look at some of those areas and see if there really was a big change and how many points were lost because of those reported behavioral violations.
There's an issue.
Well, but you're not, my main point is that you're not capturing bike volumes, which is the number one indicator of safety.
We do have bike counters. That's data you can grab.
The bike volumes would be interesting data to have if we had it for every street segment. And so we really,
Yeah.
we really miss that information kind of across the county. We only have it in some areas, and only on some segments.
I hear you, but okay, well, I have 2 more points, but
We're running tight on
Yeah,
time.
if
here.
we could, don't put too much emphasis on report a problem, because by your own statement, you said the county is not doing anything with the reports. Therefore, the county is discouraging people from submitting the reports, because all it's doing is wasting the cyclist's time. For potholes, you're really good, you fix potholes. But when I say this is screwed up, you say noted or closed, because we're not gonna fix it. So you're training people not to submit those.
We do collect the data, so I hope we're not training them to not.
Well,
so my other 2 points were connectivity. That doesn't seem to actually be part of your data. And I think that's the big difference between the draft map that you showed the group that ranked every single street segment in the county versus what we have today. And I think this is the biggest one. I talk to people who don't bike a lot all the time, and they love the comfort map now because it's very usable to focus them in on routes that could be useful to them. What you showed us might be helpful to someone who already knows the county very well, but that's not who this helps. This helps people who don't bike a lot, who are trying to find a route. And by labeling every single street, every single segment, you actually are overwhelming people with information and not being useful to exactly the target audience of the comfort map. And so I hope that even if you have this in the background and some GIS that people can look at, I hope that we don't lose the beauty of the comfort map today, which actually helps people find routes. And then the last thing, which is little, is you mentioned pavement condition. Do you have trail condition information? And can you, Parks keeps giving different answers about whether there's a trail condition index or not.
Parks is working on that. And I think with this map, what we're working on is establishing a really good working layer to which, as we get more data into our GIS, which is updated regularly, we can introduce some of these additional data layers into the map. But right now, no, we do not have that available.
Okay, thanks.
If I may go, yeah, I'll kind of reiterate that, yeah, the comfort map's best purpose is as a route planning tool, and just including every possible street kind of obfuscates that. And then kind of back to the bike volume question. So it's of course has its own biases and it's not a perfect metric, but something like the Strava global heat map provides a very good overview of which routes are currently used, at least by, Bikernauts, to use that term.
I have 2 questions. One, do the ratings take air pollution into account at all? I hate riding on the Custis. I will avoid it if I can do streets, because you're riding next to many lanes of traffic, particularly at certain times of day. It's just loud and polluted. So I would knock that down just automatically versus the WOD, which is such a lovely experience. My other concern is you were saying that the slope has a big impact on the score, and I'm just wondering if there is a way for viewers of the map to be able to tell which routes are being knocked down by the steepness, by the slope issues, versus the safety issues. I mean, for me, it's all about safety. I don't care, if it takes me an hour to get up that hill or whatever. I'm going to be safe. I'm so happy. But if there's a way that you can let viewers can tell, why it's getting knocked down, and if something has a low score, just because it's steep, then that would be good to know.
I have a question, and maybe David, you can answer this. Did the comfort map come from, didn't we hire someone named Peter Firth or something that worked with us to kind of use some sort of algorithm?
That was a different study and a different product. That was a low bicycle stress index.
Low stress, okay, so it's
And
different. Okay.
similar but different approaches, and that also looked at every segment across the county, assigned scores.
Did that get incorporated at all into the comfort process?
I don't think it did, because I talked to Henry about it at length. I have it. And I don't know why, but it wasn't ever used. And at this point, it's old. So it was like interesting to read, but ultimately.
I do know why it wasn't. Is that project, if you will, product was a grant from COG. It was done as an engagement, if you will, by Northeastern University, studying the county, and then went away. And what they left us was a lot of data, but not really training and methods about how to use it. So we have it on disk, but it's very since it's 7 years old. The Mineta Institute, which Brian is going with, is like a level above. It's a meta study, of which the Peter Firth version is one. Tool does their own version, and Alta does their own version, and this consultant does their own version. The Mineta Institute looks at the whole approach and has provided the guidance that this project is using.
I have one last question. I apologize for taking as much time as I am on this. I know that Strava and certainly there are users of Strava and there are folks that don't, but it does kind of give heat maps and of lots of places that where people ride, and like Jillian was saying, is that something that is potentially considered in this process, just because that's where a lot of people ride, because they're and it sort of does capture that.
It's an interesting idea.
There are a lot of sources of data, not just
There
Strava,
are.
but there's Streetlight, as Dan Reinhardt was saying, has some biking data. There's the cabbie data. There's the rental bike scooter data. There's the count data that we collect, which are all point location figures. There's a whole research effort of data fusion that could inform the Arlington County comfort map. We're not there yet. There's lots of data sources out there.
It might make sense to compare, just for a handful of streets, streetlight data to Strava, because Strava, you're going to get you're skimming the cream on the cyclists. Yeah. It's a terrible, in terms of making a comfort map, it's a terrible data source. Where everybody who goes cycling has their cell phone.
Yeah, not always true.
Well, any more questions? I really want to say thank you.
Yeah,
thank you so much. It's really interesting what you're doing.
3 great presentations.
Yeah. And keep in mind, we'll be back. And as Brian and I were talking earlier, this is still like a draft. Like it's a work in progress. And that's why we're here now, to just get a reaction and see what you all think. So I think this is very helpful.
So I ask one final question, not about this, that was great. Before we leave, Chris, I forgot to ask you at the end of the BDOT presentation. Do we agree that we should do yet one more letter about Route 1? We have a consensus on that? And which means probably David or I should start something. There's actually, there's some time on that. It's now due the end of the month. June, not May.
And please, everybody who's gonna write comments, if you're gonna write anything, in volume, share it with the group so that everybody can grab your notes.
So
We'll
yeah,
get something started.
yeah, I think it would be good to get a draft letter that we can then distribute around.
I think doing the Barcroft letters could be easier. Because I think we basically outlined everything. We don't want to send volumes to be done. Or the contractor.
I know we're quite past our time here. Is there any other announcements that anybody has here
From the county,
from the county or where?
I have two
Mike?
announcements. June 10th will be the Shared Street Pilot Project presentation to the Neighborhood Complete Streets Commission for funding. That's coming up next week. It is a public meeting. There will be an online link for that. And we will receive comment at that meeting as well. The second announcement is just to keep your eyes and ears open. We started taking a look again at the Columbia Bike Boulevard network as part of our data collection and kind of getting information about the context of the locations. We've reached out to Phoenix Bikes to set up a youth bike ride. Still to be determined. The youth have to vote on the routes that they pick, and we're hoping to get a spot in July. I'll be keeping in contact with Elwin, who can share with the BAC any updates to that. And I'd like to extend the invitation to a couple of members of the BAC to join us on that July ride. The rides are Saturdays. They begin late morning, sometime around 10, and usually go to about 1 or 2 in the afternoon. So again, that'd be for the Columbia Bike Boulevards. If we don't get picked by the youth, go back to the drawing board and try to come up with something different.
Question to Elwin. Any movement on the fixes to the boundary channel that that got highlighted?
Yeah, thanks for putting that. Did get enough today. Yeah, they're currently working with VDOT to identify technical solutions, such as signage, pavement markings, what have you. Just for those things that in near term, but for more comprehensive overhauls for configuration and alignments, I'm going to get wrapped up with the Long Bridge Drive project.
Okay, can you just dump that one, that small concrete panel to water, sewer and streets and just have them fix it? It'll cost less to fix it than it will to reflect on it. There's plenty of time to reflect on on what we need to do in the future, but let's just fix the problem.
Any other announcements? Thanks, everyone. This was great. At first,
Good to be in person.
Back in
Yay.
person and hybrid. So yes, thanks. All work.
Technology work.
Thank you very much, Mike. for
So do we
everything.
want to start? Barely comprehend.
Next time, I'm gonna send a tentative. Next time I'm gonna share with
Like when I was walking Arlington.
Good to see you. Quite a long time.
That's been a lot of work. It seems like we bumped into each other though. Like, we have to have.
Okay.
Well.
It's gonna be downstairs, I think.
Like to work there.
It was like before it was remodeled.
I think the last time I may have seen you was the end of the Blazing Saddles a year ago.
Yeah, maybe some, yeah. All the attendance you're doing. Interesting stuff.
No, but it is interesting, and it's a fascinating development.
No, stop running.
And it was always there, but I had no idea it was like
Kind of,
single owner.
well, you go kind of around it, right?
You go around and what's a pain to get.
Right.
And to the point, and I didn't really study the George Mason plan, that when they It's not always right. I think it's like a bike facility on one side and a wide side, but it's not like.
Oh, the new one?
You know, when you say, okay, 12 Boulevard, 12th Street Boulevard, just ends toward pictures, don't try to get through there. I mean, I guess that.
So Mike, did you know how much work you were getting into?
Well,
Cam too. I mean,
well, no, back when I was at E2C2, we used to do the PLCs or whatever.
Produce a product that's useful.
I was on
And we can do that, like, we'll get.
the Career Center one, built the old new elementary school. They were like this.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then, yeah, periodically.
I didn't have to sit through meetings of arguing about brick styles and colors of
Well, no, they.
orders that would best enhance the